Greetings, everybody. This is a video that I've been thinking about making for several years, at least going back to when I visited Iceland, if not before. It's a topic that's long interested me, but I hesitate to make a video about it because it doesn't have any direct application of libertarianism or political theory or what most people consider economics, although the broader definition of economics kind of includes almost everything. But nonetheless, I think this is a fascinating topic, and what kind of pushed me over the edge to discuss it is that there's a decent number of people who have observed this phenomenon, but who don't talk about it. And I don't know why. There's no, as far as I know, explicit taboo about discussing it. But I think that makes it all the more interesting and worthwhile to dive into. And that, of course, is the name, the title of the video implies, is the very interesting and precipitous decline in the role of communal showering in American society. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the most important issue out there. Certainly not. All as fascinating as I find it, and as interesting it does, and I think it's an indicator of many other things that are going on. So even if in the narrow sense this doesn't seem that interesting to you, it may actually be have a more broader application than you might initially realize. Um, the other elephant in the room to address here, and I'll just put it out there, is I obviously have a bias in this. Being gay, being attracted to men, scenarios that involve naked men obviously have an added element of eroticism to me that the average person is not going to have, at least most of the time. Uh, and I can't deny that that's uh, a part of my fascination with this topic is at least partially derived from that, but not entirely. So uh, this initially was fascinating to me, I think, growing up, and I think this is true of many people. When I was in elementary school, I was not exposed to public nudity. Um, I took swimming lessons, but it was fairly easy to avoid nudity with my peers. Um, my family did not practice nudity within itself, at least not in any regular sense. Uh, I wasn't playing, doing anything that was requiring me to get naked in front of a whole bunch of guys. And I was quite uncomfortable when I was put into scenarios where this might be possible. So a few times, like in summer camp, like in Cub Scouts, we would have to go swim in the lake, and we'd all have to go change in a cabin, and there'd be like 20 or 30 little boys in there trying to change their swimsuits, and I remember being like terrified. Uh, it was so awkward. It was so um, I felt so exposed and so um, almost violated. That it was terrifying just to. It's one thing to take off your shirt, but then to take off your pants and let everyone just see everything. It was like such an invasion of trust and privacy that I was terrified of it. But I was also aware within the popular culture that eventually this was an expectation, that when I got into, say, middle school and high school, if I started playing sports, that it would become, or and certainly in college, that there would be facilities that would be solely dedicated to showering with other members of my grade or in my class. And you could see this in all the media, all the television shows, whether they be cartoons or live action shows, that dealt with adolescents, that dealt with people who were, teenagers. They would sometimes, well, they would very often have settings that involve locker room settings, but sometimes they would even have episodes completely dedicated to the angst and the nervousness that uh, young boys feel. And I'm going to say this is directed at boys and not women. I think that's probably a little bit different. I don't know much about it, um, although there might be some similarities. But this was almost like a rite of passage that you go through, and you are exposed to this. And I also picked up that the people in the generation ahead of me had this expectation and had this experience. Now, I didn't have people telling me, oh, when I was growing up, we would all shower together, but I did have the distinct impression that this was something that was coming up on my future. This is something that I'd have to learn how to deal with, and I'd learn how to have to get over. Well, I got to middle school, and I was absolutely terrified because there were indeed communal showers in our gym, in the locker room, and of course, the first day in gym class, you don't do anything. You do the syllabus and talk about what class is going to be like, and you don't, there's no danger or threat of being forced to get naked. But I had run over in my head maybe ways to get out of taking gym class, which was required. But I couldn't think of an excuse that was plausible. The actual reason that I would want to not take it was simply because I was afraid to get naked in front of other boys. But I realized that that excuse sounded so pathetic that I couldn't bring myself to actually make that argument to anyone. I talked to some of my friends about doing things like, and this wasn't just me, this was them, they shared the same trepidation that I did, that, well, maybe we'll go and splash water on our face from a sink or whatever else. I remember one friend in particular telling me categorically he will never get naked in front of anybody else. So we started gym class in 6th grade. After the second or third day, we have our first day where we're out playing a game, probably kickball or dodgeball or whatever else, and after about half an hour, of course, we're all completely covered in sweat. Our faces are red, we're dripping, our shirts are soaked, and every time the gym teacher, blew his whistle, I was petrified that he was going to say, "All right, everybody, go take showers." Uh, Everything that I had seen in popular culture leading up to this had indicated that this was um, an expectation, something that I would have to go through. I do even think the syllabus even said something like bringing gym clothes, but also bringing like a towel. So I did. I had a towel and I had shampoo, and I was ready to go. I wasn't ready, but I was prepared. I wasn't mentally ready, but I was physically prepared for this traumatic ordeal that I was certain to come my way. And the time kept on getting closer and closer and closer and closer to the end of the hour, and I was thinking, gosh, they're going to have to give us, at least 5 minutes to do this, to get it over with. And it never came, and the bell rang, and he's like, everyone go. And he never said the word shower. And over the entire course of my career in middle school and high school, at no point did any gym teacher ever even suggest that maybe it was a good idea to take a shower. They didn't ask us to. They certainly didn't tell us to. And so this thing that I had taken for granted as an expectation of a rite of passage, something that was going to happen, just didn't happen. Now, I just passed it off and, okay, maybe things changed at my school. Maybe these gym teachers are different than previous gym teachers. But as I got older and when I was in college, I began hearing that this was a trend that was happening all over the place, which is what initially got me interested in the topic in a more philosophical, cultural, sociological level than just any kind of hormonal interest that I might have. Um, Communal showering among men in the United States still goes on, and it's not gone. It still happens, but it's dramatically decreased from where it happens. You still have it, of course, in places like the military. You still have it in certain gym environments. You still have it in some school environments. There are public schools to this day and private schools, definitely private schools, actually, more so than public schools, from what I can tell, that are still requiring it, or even if they're not requiring it, still going on. But it has dramatically decreased in its prevalence. If we were to go back, I'd say at least 30 years, maybe slightly less, 25, depending on where we are, this would have been a ubiquitous practice. Every school would have been requiring people to shower after gym class and after sporting events like football practice or basketball games or track practice. Uh, and the you know logistical evidence of this still remains. In schools that aren't requiring it, they still often have communal showers there from the days in the past when it was required. And the question is, why has this shift happened? It's very fascinating. On pure hygienic reasons alone, I think that requiring kids to shower after activities like this is perfectly justifiable. Now, I don't want to get into the whole thing of schools making people to do things. Obviously, I don't think schools should be mandated. I don't think we should have compulsory education. I don't think we should have compulsory curriculum. But in the sake of argument here, if you're going to have physical education, if you're going to have physically active, sweat-inducing, dirt-inducing um, activities in your pedagogy, um, which I don't think necessarily you need to have, but let's assume that you do. If you're going to have them, it makes sense as part of that process to get clean. And like, it was quite frankly revolting, what we would do. We would we're little kids, we're sweating, we have terrible little kid BO, and then what would we do? We go and we would just throw on a new shirt, no shower, no shampoo, no soap, none of that, and then we would go to like band class or home ec and sit next to all these other kids, and it was just something that was going through. Now, I think uh, my generation is right on the cusp. I think that this practice was going on right up until or very near to the time when I'm guessing when I was in elementary school, it was still actually going on at my school. But it varies in different schools. There are probably schools today, I mean, almost certainly schools to this day that are still requiring it, but it's become much, much less common. Um, and this is something that I've observed now when as a regular gym goer. The willingness to get naked in public correlates very, very strongly with age. And this is an anecdotal observation that a lot of people in the United States would make. Um, it's hard to put a number, but I would say anecdotally, people who are over 40 are much more inclined to be comfortable getting naked and doing so on a regular basis. And people under 40 are much less likely. And if you're talking about under 30 or under 25, you're talking about, less than 10% of the gym going population in my example that is comfortable being seen naked. You have people who will maybe take showers and stuff, but they'll be very, very careful never to show anything. Um, and that's a very interesting behavioral difference from people who are willing to show. What's the big deal? Why is this such a big shift? Why has this happened? Does it really mean anything? Um, besides the frustrations of any lurking homosexuals? That's a good question. I think it's an interesting one, though. Now, there's a couple ways to go about it. I think one of the main reasons that this has happened, uh, there have apparently been some researchers have gone around and asked high schools, why is this no longer practiced? And many of them have expressed basically liability concerns, which is interesting because there haven't been any big lawsuits about this. There haven't been any big Supreme Court cases or massive scandals that involved um, communal showering in a school setting resulting in something bad. Now, there have been molestation scandals, but those happen independently of whether you have communal showering or not. Um, and just the fear alone, just the fear of a litigious society has been enough to curb the activity in some places. But another more general factor is that the kids have become increasingly resistant to this process happening. You have a process where younger and younger kids are less and less likely and less willing to take part in communal showering. And that's a very fascinating question. The best answers that I've heard relate to family size and household size. If you go back a generation or two or even more, you have on average larger families. So, two parents, but then four, five, six siblings as opposed to two siblings. And also, uh, further back, smaller households, maybe one or two bedrooms with one bathroom instead of three or four bedrooms and two bathrooms. Well, in a scenario like that, a person growing up sharing a bedroom with several siblings, perhaps even lots of siblings, and sharing a bathroom with the entire family and indeed a large family, just has a much lower expectation of privacy than somebody who grows up with one sibling and their own bedroom. And in my example, I had a brother, but we both had our own bedrooms and our own bathrooms, whereas both of my parents, they grew up in multiple sibling households, sharing bedrooms with their siblings, and they would have had a much lower expectation of privacy than me and my brother did growing up. With the result being when they went to school and were put in a situation where they might have to shower in front of other people, it wasn't such a big deal because they were already used to doing that in a routine way with their family members. Whereas my generation, in general, having much more privacy and a much higher expectation of privacy, this was like a huge variance. This was a big change. This was a big shocking shift, to my daily routine to the point where I was absolutely terrified of it. Now, the other interesting kind of thing, and this happened with me and it happened with other people that I observed, is that despite the tremendous amount of trepidation that I felt, once I was actually more or less forced by circumstance into a situation where I had to shower naked with other guys, which in my case didn't never happened in school, it never happened in college, it never happened in sports. Um, I do it now at the gym, but it's not forced on me at the gym. But it happened in Boy Scouts when I was maybe 14 or 15 is when just because we would go to campgrounds for a week, for 2 weeks, and the only way you could shower was in a communal setting. And it's one thing to go to gym class, but you can still go home at the end of the day and shower, and it's only one day of reek that you're getting rid of. It's a whole other ball game when you're talking about 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 2 weeks in some cases. And those situations, it was. much harder to avoid. And oddly enough, there was a peer pressure to take part in this. I think this is part of, there's something here. There's a certain degree of sociability that goes on in the, and I don't mean like in the homoerotic orgy fashion, but just in a among peers, among a peer group, among a clique, however you want to call it, a group of friends, a gang, however you want to define it. There's a certain social element to this that I think a lot of people find appealing, and I don't just mean gay people. In fact, a lot of gay people don't find it appealing, and I think that's something I should address right here. The fear of showering naked with other guys is not something that is restricted to heterosexual males. Gays, if anything, are more terrified of it. They feel like there's a higher risk that they'll embarrass themselves by becoming aroused. I think that this is actually not very likely, but it's a fear that they have. Um, they're more they're more worried that they'll get they'll be accused of checking someone out either erroneously or correctly, and that these are just added reasons for them to be worried about it. So in my experience, a lot of gay guys are just as terrified of the prospect of showering with other men as straight guys are. Um, but there does seem to be a certain social element to this that a lot of people like. And so I was absolutely terrified of doing this. And when I was finally more or less forced, and it's kind of a funny story that I won't relate here, um, it was great. I had a great time. And like, I don't mean we weren't doing anything, we weren't messing around, but it was just nice to be relaxed, to be open, to not be worked up about it. You know, you can imagine several times before this where I would go to the showers at like 5 a.m. and just in and out and like as fast as I possibly could and just terrified at any minute that someone is going to walk around the corner and see my butt and see me naked and oh my God, that's so terrifying. And then to juxtapose that with like just be relaxed, take everything off when you're ready, get clean, have a good, chill chat with your friends in the jocular way that, guys are going to do. That was so much more refreshing and better in a hygienic sense, way better. So I went from maybe taking one shower a week to once a day, at summer camp once this transition happened. And it was a complete 180 from my perspective of this is something that I'm absolutely terrified to this is something that I actually rather enjoy and look forward to. Um, and even my completely straight friends were the same way. In fact, they were the ones who applied peer pressure to me to join. I never got peer pressure, by the way, to do drugs or alcohol. I got peer pressure to shower with the other kids in my Boy Scout troop. And I've witnessed that on athletic teams. I've seen that on hockey teams, on football teams. I've seen this transition in other people who are like, I'm never going to do this. This is terrifying. And then they do it one time and they'll be like, oh yeah, this is fine. I like this. This is rather enjoyable. It's kind of nice. And I'll say, after I joined a gym much later in the recent past, I find that it's very good for body image. You put everything out there. It's very hard to sulk and be jealous when you're just out in the open seeing everybody else. Um, you can see people who are a lot worse off than you, and then you can see people who are a lot better off than you, and it really gives you a lot of perspective. And one thing that kind of really made this very clear, the point of view was when I went to Iceland. In Iceland, and I think this is true of many European countries, but I think especially true in Iceland, communal showering is just part of the culture. They have a very strong pool culture where people go, and because of the logistics of keeping the pool cleans, it is mandated that everyone shower naked before they go, and they have these large naked shower facilities for all the Icelanders to go to, and they are completely without shame, without hesitation. And when you go, it is actually quite culturally shocking because you will see everything from babies and strollers all the way up to old men and walkers and everything in between. And there's not even the slightest hesitation. You don't see anybody trying to hide in the corner. You don't see anybody looking around before they take anything off. Everybody just drops everything and they just go. And the only people that you see who have any kind of issue with it are tourists, usually American tourists, although not exclusively. Um, and it was so shocking to come back and then come into an environment where the only people who will get naked are people who are over 40 in general, not exclusively. And even there's a great deal less openness about it. And that's such an interesting cultural difference, and not just between the United States and Iceland, but between the United States and many other Western countries. Or even in a micro sense within certain microcultures within the United States. So like, yeah, in the military they do it, in athletic teams they do it, some gyms do it. Um, I've noticed hockey players tend to be, of all the teams that I've observed, hockey players are the most amenable to doing this. I've seen a lot of guys who, even in football, they're no longer doing this as much. Wrestling, they're no longer doing it as much. Even though I always was under the understanding that wrestling hygienically requires you to shower because you're exposing yourself to parasites of the other people that you wrestle all the time. In fact, when I grew up, I was told, I don't know if this is true, that it was a state law that wrestlers had to shower. But I have met people who played, who wrestled in high school and said, "No, we never once took a shower. I would always go home, never ever ever." I took someone to the gym once, and he had played football, he had played soccer, and um, he'd done wrestling. And when it came time to go and take a shower, he was like, "Dude, I don't want, I've never done this before." I'm like, "You played all those sports for all those years, all that time in the gym, and you've never gotten naked in front of another guy before?" He's like, "No." And I was like, "Well, you're not getting in my car all sweaty, so you have to take all that off right now." And he did, and it was fine. He tried to cover himself with his hands. And I said that, like the whole Adam and Eve, it's not going to work. That's going to draw more attention to yourself. In this environment, nobody cares. Everybody sees each other naked every day. It's not even erotic. You see the same guy naked every day for months. You're not going to be like, "Oh my God, how's it going?" It's like, "I've fucking seen you so many times." Um, or even somebody who's pretty attractive. It's like, I see them all the time. It's not a big deal. It's not an erotic scenario. And there's a certain egalitarianism about it too that's kind of interesting. A lot of the guys who go to my gym are upper class people, including the mayor of Manchester and the mayor of the surrounding towns and the city council people. I didn't know that that's what they were. To me, they were just naked old men that I saw every morning after they played racquetball. But in the shower stall, without all the accoutrements of society, it's just the human body in all of its glory and agony, however you want to put it. Um, which, by the way, I think that's good that people get exposed to that. It's good to see fucking old people and see, that's your future. It's going to help you enjoy yourself a lot more, realizing that you're not going to be like this forever. Um, but then it pains me to see, people who are younger in general. And yes, there's a part of me that's disappointed because like I'm eager to see, naked guys who are in good shape. But it's sad when you see somebody who, rather than be in a very relaxed, um, soothing environment, sees it as an environment where they're almost under siege, where like they can't be seen. It's terrifying. The contortions that people go through to maintain that level of privacy in a situation that doesn't really afford that much privacy is quite interesting. The whole towel dance, the people showering in their underwear and their swimsuits, or just not changing at all, any number of other things like that. And I think the juxtaposition between the two is really interesting. Um, I for one think that it's not like you need to do this or your life depends on this or it will change your life or anything like this. But I think that it's a nice way to enrich your life in just a little way, to be relaxed, to be okay, to be open, to not be worried, to not fret about what other people are going to say or think, which is they'll never say anything or think. I mean, maybe they'll think something, but people are not, there's so much that can be seen and said about everybody that there's no point in seeing or saying anything about anyone. Um, you know, in an environment where this stuff was really common, I suppose through the law of numbers, there would have been incidents, but it's so unlikely now. And and just kind of as an aside, I have never seen any discussion about this topic or people analyzing it, except for specifically with pools. Apparently, and this strikes people as crazy, but there's a documentary you can watch on YouTube called "Naked Swimming at School." It's 4 parts long and fascinating documentary because up until the uh, proliferation of synthetic swimsuits, many pools required people, and this is public pools, this is school pools, this is YMCA pools, required people to swim naked because the chlorine would break down the wool and cotton fibers in the suits of the day, and those fibers, once they got in the filtration system of the pool, would destroy it and cause there to need to be maintenance. And not wishing to have the pool break down every couple days and go to the expense of repairing it every couple days, Many institutions that operated pools required that men at least swim naked. And this is something that persisted up until the 70s, 80s, and in a few cases into the 90s. Um, and the documentary, maybe I'll find a link and put it in the description if people are interested, to see, in the 50s and the 60s, it was not even considered unusual or avant-garde or noteworthy to have a high school where all the boys swam naked together. And now it's come to the point where like even suggesting that is so radically, strange. Now that's a logistical thing. With the rise of synthetic suits, it was no longer a hazard to the filtration system of the pools of the fibers breaking down. However, there's something to be said. There's no reason that you need a suit. I mean, maybe at the Olympic level, when you're talking about the drag generated in tenths of a second and all that, it makes it, speedo might help. But if you're just talking about regular fitness in a pool, the stuff that you'd be doing in high school, not really necessary. Uh, and it's more Victorian notions of women not being exposed to naked men that kind of brought the suit in there. But so, and that's another thing. This Puritanism, it's in a lot of ways we get away from our Puritanism, and yet we embrace it more and more and more. We have this more and more sexually explicit culture, like in the media and in the tabloids, but then in our personal lives, we become much more reserved. Oh, we can't be seen naked. We can't even. You hear stories about lifeguards getting in trouble because they have a bulge, and people in the not even an erect bulge, just a large penis that it can be seen through their suits. And people who are at the community pool don't like it because they're reminded that that's a boy. I think that that's really silly, and that hyperbolic reaction to a perfectly natural, perfectly acceptable element of not only the sexuality but of humanity is farcical and completely unnecessary. So I think that I feel bad for uh, if you're one of those people who's absolutely terrified of this. I wouldn't like run out to your nearest YMCA and just start taking naked showers, but like when the situation arises where you might be exposed to it, have an open mind and like don't realize it's not the end of the world if somebody else sees you naked. Um, in fact, it can be very refreshing and very it can be very nice even without any homoeroticism whatsoever. I mean, most of the time I have no homoeroticism because people I'm looking at are not homoerotic to me. Um, and even when they are, it's a mundane, hygienic situation. We would have to start making out and lathering each other up and all that for that to transition into something that was overtly sexual, and that just almost never happens. So yeah, I think it is an interesting topic. It's an interesting shift in our society regarding how we socialize with each other, regarding our relative wealth, our expectations of privacy, our individuality versus our interactions with others. There's so much now. It's so strange because so much of what we do is now out there in Facebook, and I'm not even talking about the NSA, but between all of the apps that we have and the Google searches and the phone numbers, and like we're connected as never before, but then also isolated as never before. We don't. It's a really like the we're getting pulled and I don't want to say just necessarily opposite directions, but in so many different directions and so many different intensities of the force, and it varies from all, not everyone is affected by all of this in the same way. There are people who are quite accustomed. I was talking to one guy, a straight guy, who said that he grew up on a farm, and by the time he was 8, he was doing farm work with his father, and he and his father, and then later his younger brothers, they would shower together all the time because you would go work and you'd get extremely filthy, and the mother didn't want them coming back to dinner all covered in whatever the taint of farm work. And when he went on to college and he would go to the gym, he felt perfectly comfortable, going en natural. And I think that that's kind of a microcosm of the shift, because that type of um, you know informal family exposure um, doesn't exist for most people now. And I'm not advocating that it should. It makes me uncomfortable, even with how I feel about it publicly, just because it seems strange with my family. But on the other hand, it almost makes more sense with your family than anyone else. Um, so yeah, this isn't oh, I think public schools should force this on everyone, because obviously I don't even think we should have public schools. But I think that people should be open to the idea that it's not the end of the world, and there might actually be missing something. That's what's really sad about it. You might actually be missing a form of human interaction that people have enjoyed for millennium, uh, and you have been many people have been habituated a way to avoid that um, expression of yourself, and I think that that's sad. Um, so anyway, write your comments. What do you think? Uh, you know, does this have anything to do with libertarianism? Probably not. Doesn't need to, of course not. It's my channel. I can talk about whatever I want. Um, but uh, what am I way off base here? Is this completely, am I just 100% homo and this is the only reason that I would find this even remotely interesting? Let me know in the comments. Also, I'm going to Wyoming tomorrow to work, so I'm going back to work. I've lived for a year off of precious metals, and now it's time to go back and make more money. So I don't know when I'll be able to upload any videos, but I haven't been uploading them frequently anyway, so you might not see an interruption necessarily, although there might be a change in scenery. So anyway, I hope you all have a great night, and I'll talk to you all some other time. Bye-bye.